It's my honor to be with you tonight as we salute the men and women who, when called upon, accomplished the extraordinary. These men and women are part of a tradition of service that goes back to our very beginnings. And it was never more on display than 75 years ago across the Pacific and in Europe, among the generation that fought and won World War II. And that is where our story begins. Joining us to introduce the story of tonight's first American heroes, please welcome film and television star Kyle Chandler.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the Great Crusade, toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. And thus opened the order of the day from General Dwight D. Eisenhower, June 6, 1944. The tide of the war had turned since the Nazi victories of 1940 and 1941, and yet the greatest action was still to come. It would take place along the coast of France, at Normandy, and transform its participants into legends. Sharing the story of the most epic military operation in history, 75 years ago today, is Clint Eastwood.
At 2:27 a.m. along the coast of France, as enemy fire filled the sky, Lieutenant Robert Mason Mathis of the 82nd Airborne Division ordered his men to prepare to jump. As he stood in the plane's doorway, an enemy shell burst, ripping right through his chest. Ignoring his wound, he pulled himself up and called to his men, "Follow me," as he leapt into the night. 30 minutes later, Lieutenant Mathis was found dead, the first American officer killed in June 6, 1944, D-Day. By the end of the day, the Allied invasion forces would lose 10,000 more men, wounded, missing, and killed. 6:30 a.m., landing craft ferrying thousands of soldiers sped towards their target along the Normandy coast, dubbed Utah Beach. Among the first men to hit the beach was Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., son of the former president. As a wave of men came ashore, Roosevelt realized that they were more than a mile off target. Without hesitation, Roosevelt legendarily declared, "We'll start the war from here," and he ordered his men inland. The start of the war in the West had been for years coming, since the surrender of France and the British retreat at Dunkirk. Now the Allies were on the offensive. Their forces were under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower. British and Canadian troops would land on the beaches dubbed Gold, Juno, and Sword, while the Americans would land at Utah and Omaha. Under the cover of darkness, airborne paratroopers would jump behind German lines and secure the routes inland. All the while, the epic bombardment of the sea and air would soften Hitler's defenses. Action began just after midnight on June 6th as British airborne troops assaulted the invasion eastern flank. An hour later, 13,000 paratroopers of the American 101st and 82nd Airborne dropped it in the west. By 7:25 a.m., British and Canadian soldiers began landing at Gold and Juno beaches. At Sword Beach, the Scottish 15th Lord Lovat and his 1st Special Services Brigade arrived with aplomb, marching ashore, led by Lovat's personal bagpiper. Point du Hoc, men of the U.S. 2nd Ranger Battalion scaled 100-foot seaside cliffs, tasked with taking out a massive German gun battery. As German troops mustered in the distance, Sergeant Leonard Lamel crept towards the cannons, disabling them and breaking their gun sights. The cannons were in position to rain fire along the entire beaches of Utah and Omaha. They were destroyed by Leonard Lamel and the boys of Point du Hoc. If the Germans would have stopped the invasion, it would come against the Americans at Omaha Beach. Omaha's location and wide strips of sand meant that any invasion in Normandy must come through it. Eisenhower knew it, Hitler knew it, and the fate of the war would rest on its outcome. At 6:36 a.m., the ramp from the landing craft carrying the troops from the 29th Infantry Division lowered into the channel. The first soldiers to land at Omaha were met by a wall of fire. American boys barely out of high school were cut down before they could step on French soil. Many drowned trying to make it to shore. Arriving in the first wave, Army medic Ray Lambert was shot through the arm the instant his boat hit the beach. Still he ran from soldier to soldier, giving aid and comfort. Hit again in the leg, he shot himself with morphine and continued on, pulling men from the water as the casualties mounted. Private Eldon Wehan took shelter behind a burned-out vehicle. He cried for what felt like hours before pulling himself up, grabbing a rifle and moving forward. Years later, Wehan would recall, "To this day, I've never shed another tear. I would give anything to have one good cry or one good laugh. I hurt inside, but I cannot get out of my emotions since that day. I've never been able to." By mid-morning, the invasion of Omaha, and thus the invasion of Normandy, was in doubt. At headquarters, Eisenhower waited. In his pocket was a message announcing the withdrawal of his forces in the event of failure. He accepted full responsibility in writing, "If any blame or any fault attaches to this event, it is mine alone." And yet the men pressed forward. By midday, the tide began to turn, as wave after wave of American troops fought their way up the bluffs and through the pillboxes and the roadblocks. As darkness fell over Normandy, some 156,000 troops had come ashore. Years later, a soldier would recall, "The first night in France I spent in a ditch beside a hedgerow, thoroughly exhausted, but I felt elated. I was king of the hill, at least in my own mind, for a moment." My contribution to the heroic tradition of the United States Army might have been the smallest achievement in the history of courage, but at least for a time I had walked in the company of very brave men. By the end of June 6, 1944, Allied troops had gained a tiny foothold on the edge of the continent. It came at the cost of 10,000 casualties, including 4,000 dead. 75 years ago, these first steps into France marked the first step towards the heart of Nazi Germany.
Ladies and gentlemen, 75 years later, please welcome surviving heroes of the invasion of Normandy.
Welcome. Can you share with us, sir, what your memories of jumping into Normandy on D-Day with the 101st Airborne Division? Can you
Sure.
tell us what that was?
Scared the hell out of me.
Yes, I understand.
When I jumped out of the plane, the guy in front of me slipped to the floor. By the time I got him up, we must have gone about 4 or 5 miles way away from our drop zone. Finally, I landed on top of a bunch of cows. I remember as if it were yesterday.
Mr. Lambert, you landed on Omaha Beach with the first wave. Would you mind sharing what you saw that day?
Many of my friends laying on the beach dead. They had been brave, some of the bravest men that I ever knew, and their luck had run out. There was probably 25 of them laying dead on the beach at that time as we approached the beach.
Sir, your duty was to bury the American and the German dead. In your view, what is the price of freedom, sir?
It wasn't easy. It was terrible. As a young boy, I had a big fear of death as a little kid. And here I am facing death every day for 11 months.
What I went through was relatively minor compared to others that paid the supreme price. But that's what I meant when I said we carry with us a lot of emotion that really nobody knows about.
The jump altitude was 750. I jumped at 500 because of some problems that developed that I had never anticipated before. Aztec warrior, Cherokee warrior, and Apache warrior says, not goodbye, but see you soon. Geronimo.
How did you feel when you watched that German surrender?
Seeing all that was going on around me, with all that had happened, wondered about the day not even sure it would ever come to, but there I was. And now, at all monumentally day of history of the world ended in my life that I will never forget.
God bless, sir. Thank you.
I was honored and privileged to be a nurse in World War II. I saw the soldiers and what some of them went through. These are the things that make me honor and respect veterans. I know what some of them have been through. So I want to just say again that veterans are my heroes.
Once again, the heroes of D-Day.